Agus thuirt don cuiste an chuir seo chur lomsa Pharaoh chéirí a tháinig an seo inniu tá an bhróidúil as an slua mór atá seo, ní bheith slua mar seo I géirí in éair. Nuair bhí mé ó cúlaméin is scéalta faoi Sean Tracy agus Dan Breen agus Sean Horgan agus mar sin is cúis bród domsa bheith an seo inniu. An old Roman once lamented that poor is the nation that has no heroes, but poorer still is the nation that, having those heroes, fails to remember and to honour them. Which, you may ask, has Ireland become? But we are gathered here today to remember, to honour such heroes. We know what patriotism was and what patriotism remains, we who refuse to forget. You gather here today not because you are summoned, not because it is a place to be seen, not to have your photographs taken or to garner votes. We gather because we should remember, we should recall those young patriots who risked all for their country's freedom, for our liberty, and for the principles declared in the 1916 proclamation. As Irish people, it is our duty to remember. We have our heroes and we will remember and honour them. It is fitting that we gather here today as a community, not flocking beneath one political banner or another. For these young men were of your community. They were born to hold a pen or a shovel or a hurley, but certainly not a gun. However, a century ago, their conquered country called. Their rifles sloped uneasily on their shoulders. The men of the column began their march, oblivious to the dangers that they faced. If freedom had a price, they would pay it. Their country had called them as it had called others before them, as it had called the men of 98 and Sliabh na Món, as it had called the Fenians and Charles Kickham, as it did the young Irelanders at Ballingarry. A litany of failures, but the flame of freedom was never quenched beneath the Galtee mountains, and for these young men, hope would outbeat history. Outmanned and outgunned, ill-armed, but amongst their own people and with the ditches and mountains as their allies, they would do what many other generations failed to do. They drove the army of the conqueror from their native Tipperary. Those men who marched never asked to be remembered. They were an army without banners, searching not for glory nor honour. Flat caps and great coats, they were of their people. Some, like Dan Breen and Sean Horgan, saw their deeds recounted in books and ballads. But for most of that gallant band, they would fade from memory. As the last war of independence raged in the 6 counties, the present had become too like the past. Those who carried a gun to free their land would be cast into the national amnesia. The forgetting of those who fought for freedom became what Michael D. Higgins termed the Great Betrayal. Our heroes of old were to be forgotten. Our ballads were not to be heard, and our school children would be deprived of their history, their heritage. The men who marched this way would vanish like the dew that once marked their footsteps. But a man is never truly dead until the last person who remembers him has passed. By your presence here today, you show that you as a community have not forgotten. Tipperary remembers. The spirit that inspired those young men still roams these fields and laneways. Their deeds are not forgotten, and future generations will know that brave men passed this way. In their day, they were called rebels and fools, gunmen and terrorists. But history always speaks a different language than the laws, and today these freedom fighters are rightly remembered for what they were, our heroes. Our children's generation is now told that it has its own concerns, and what happened a century ago is history of little importance and a source of division and contention. The state and many academic historians have come to define for the nation what should be remembered and what should be forgotten. But that which the poet W.B. Yeats described as 7 heroic centuries is not theirs to define, not theirs to confine to a few non-contentious episodes in a historical narrative that seeks not to offend in words those who have offended our people with their dark deeds. bringing to this land endless wars and famines, displacement and dispersion. Our history is the property of the people of Ireland. It is a proud source of inspiration for the future and all its uncertainties, guarded as always by the few, but in trust for the many generations who will come after us. It is your history, the heroic history of Tipperary's fight, yours to cherish, yours to pass on, yours to be proud of as only you as a community can. In the Ireland of today, what passes for history tells us that Michael Collins and Eamon de Valera almost single-handedly drove the British from the 26 counties. However, history should also record that de Valera never fired a gun at the enemy, and Collins only fired a weapon on the day he died. While both have rightly earned their place in our nation's history, it was those who fought and died in these ditches and mountains, in these laneways and fields, those men of the flying columns, those men of your community who marched these laneways. It is they who gained our liberty. They did what others should have done, but they did it and did not talk about it. Though with time, generations change and memories dim, voices fade, history is reconstructed to serve the present-day political requirements. Those considered historically inconvenient will be quietly neglected. Remembering can be subversive. Therefore, it is appropriate that this monument should stand here. To all that who pass this way, let it tell a story of courage and true patriotism. It is a monument that anchors your history to your landscape, a solid and steadfast reminder, a credit to your community, and a payment of the small portion of the great debt owed to those valiant men and women who passed this way with their rifles at the ready. Poor is the nation that has no heroes, but poorer still is the nation that, having those heroes, fails to remember or honour them. Today, Tipperary remembers. Today, Tipperary honours its sons and daughters. You have not forgotten. And in recalling these men and women, let us also remember their oft-forsaken and betrayed cause, that Ireland one day might be free from the centre to the sea. Garmachwiv.
1, 2.